Welcome to Magic Gathering Strat. Today we are doing something new. We are gonna review podcasts. I always have an iPod nearby. I listen to my iPod when I train, when I walk somewhere, when I'm about to go to sleep, when I'm eating. I listen to my iPod a lot. I used to listen to a lot of... I never listened to music. I used to listen to a lot of history courses and stuff, but now it's only Magic podcasts. My interests are mainly Pauper, Draft, Magic Finance. So I have missed out on all the excellent Commander podcasts there are out there. And I also like to have some news. I like to have some information on Standard and Modern, mostly for finance purposes. But I will get into Modern once Modern Masters hit. So this list will reflect my own prejudice, my own preferences. But I hope the purpose of this is to help you find a podcast that you like. And the best place to go for Magic Podcast is mtgcast.com or iTunes. And I will present a link to MTGcast in the show notes here on YouTube. Alright, so with no further ado, let's do the top list. On number 10 we have Hoard of Notions. This is a bit of everything. It has 4 hosts, I guess, and they talk about all things Magic. I'm sure there is some sort of guideline on what they are supposed to talk about, but it seems very wide. But every podcast from here up on the list is a very good podcast. I like this a lot, and I especially appreciate the moments of geekery when they tell about nerdy things they've done. This podcast often slips into casual mode, but it's not as casual as some of the podcasts that come above it on the list. So let's go to number 9. And on number 9 we have Delving into Draft. This podcast is excellent just because of the Scottish accents. The 2 hosts have fantastic Scottish accents. It's amazing to listen to. This is a draft podcast, and the hosts are of average experience in draft, I would say. It's not close to limited resources, but they have good intentions. They talk about drafts, and if you like to get better at draft, you need to talk about drafts. And failing that, you need to listen to other people talking about drafts. And you can do that. They are also fairly structured. They did a review of the Gate Crash, of all the cards in Gate Crash. And they have like steady segments. It's overall, and they have reserve hosts that are pretty good as well. And they seem to be part of a very small Magic scene in Edinburgh. I'm not sure, somewhere in Scotland. And I love Scotland. I've been there many a time, and it's a fantastic country. So yeah, it's always fun to listen to Delving into Draft. On number 8 we find Heavy Meta. I discovered this podcast based on a recommendation made by one of the guys in Brainstorm Brewery, and what brought me there was the finance advice. There are very few finance podcasts with finance I mean Magic prices and buying and selling Magic cards. And even if I've won nationals in my country, I've been on the Pro Tour twice and I love playing Magic, but I've been the most successful as a Magic trader. I'm sorry to admit that. So I love my Magic finance, and I was really shocked when I listened to this show yesterday. So it immediately made number 8 because it was as if they were paid to swear. The language was very, very harsh, and there was some drinking as well. I think at least there was a lot of talk about drinking, and one of the hosts said, well, this is nothing compared to my other podcast where we're like shit drunk all the time. And the news about the increase in price of redemption was just fresh. So we have like 20 minutes of people screaming "fuck you wizards" over this, but still it was fun to listen to. So Yeah, I liked it. Number 7, Pit Imps. This is a really new podcast. I think it's only up to episode 3, but they focused on tournament coverage, and I haven't really listened to a good podcast that just covers tournament. And this is, of course, interesting for me because of financial things. What is making a splash in standard will become an expensive card, but it's also very interesting for anyone interested in tournament coverage. So I recommend this podcast and place it on number 7 on the list. On number 6 we have In Contention. This is Star City Games official podcast, I think. They talk a lot about Star City Games to the point where it gets annoying, but what can you do if you are Star City Games podcast? I wanted to like this more, and I think it might be the biggest podcast out there, or at least one of the top 3, because it has a lot of everybody knows about it. But I was not that impressed. I am quite impressed because I placed it on number 6, but I wanted it to be better. And we are going to number 5. Magic the Amateuring is also a very new podcast. It's extremely casual, and the premise is that Ken, a 30-year-old Magic player who has played Magic a long time, just taught Magic to Megan and Maria, and they are very, very enthusiastic about Magic. And this results in a very casual, very happy podcast, and it just puts a smile on my face. It's really fun to listen to. And guys, you're doing a great job. I'm not sure if there's ever been any content in the podcast at all, but it's fun. On number 4, we have Pauper to the People. This is the Pauper podcast. It existed before anything else existed in Pauperdom, and it's about all things in Pauper. I know there have been attempts to make this less casual, and there have been some spiky things. They stopped doing the matchups. They did like Delver versus Affinity from both sides, and it was really good. Partly because of Mikey K, who is doing a lot of things on YouTube and everywhere. He's also a very, very notable host on this podcast. There are 4 hosts, Nate, Pete, Mikey K and Chris. And I want to give a special mention to Chris Plummer, who I think is the best podcast host I've heard. And maybe partial because this is one of the first podcasts I listened to, but he's so very, very good at remaining calm and casual and relaxed, while Mikey K is a very controversial figure, and people will hate him and he will hate on stuff, and Chris is just there being calm, being structured, doing good things. And the length of time they kept this podcast up, they're approaching the number 100 episode, and well, good work, people. But this is often too casual. There is often too much talk about video games and stuff that don't relate to Pauper and don't relate specifically to classic Pauper. So that's why I, on number 3, place Pauper's Cage. Even though 2 of the 3 original hosts in 19 episodes they left the show. But the remaining host is Dime Collector, and he knows a lot about budget formats such as Silver Black, such as the other budget formats that are not sanctioned, and Classic Pauper, and especially White Weenie. This is the Spike podcast. They have fantastic episode where they bring in top pro players, not top pros. They bring top Pauper players from Magic Online who explain their decks and really go through the decks. So it's extremely good for spikes such as myself. I want to win tournaments, and this is the podcast about winning tournaments. Shout out to Gabushido, who was the original host and who got me back into Magic Finance, actually. Pauper Finance, to be specific. So, there are only 2 podcasts better than Pauper's Cage. And number 2, we have Brainstorm Brewery. This is a pure finance podcast, and the main host sounds like a demon from hell. He has a very interesting voice, and you are kind of scared of him. But the people that do the podcast are professional magic traders. They trade both online and in paper, and they know their shit about magic finance. So this is the #1 podcast for magic finance, and it's also quite entertaining. There is a merfolk fascination going on with one of the hosts that comes back every episode, and I like it. But all of these 9 podcasts, they pale in comparison to #1. There is a reason the #1 clan on Magic Online is what it is, and it's not because they spend very much time working on the clan, but they spent a lot of time working on Limited Resources. Limited Resources is a podcast that is, and it's so good that of the original host, Marshall Sutcliffe and Ryan Spain, Ryan now has a job in Wizards and is one of the guys developing the new client. Ryan, do a better job and bring back leagues, you promised. And Marshall Sutcliffe is the main host of Limited Resources and has always been. They are up to the episode I'm waiting for right now is 170. He's been around since the show has been around since Zendikar. But when Ryan got a job on Magic Online, Marshall had to bring in John Laux, and the show got even better. John Laux is has the role of being the professional drafter, and he's quite a comedian. So the chemistry got even better, even if I personally would identify with Ryan. This show has it all. If you want to get good in drafting, you are missing out by not listening to this. So Wizards hired Marshall to do the limited information column on the mothership. So now Marshall Sutcliffe is the #1 source for draft information. And this podcast covers Magic strategy in depths that I have not seen in any other podcast, and that's what makes it so brilliant. They talk about tactics. There was a whole episode devoted to attacking and blocking. There was a whole episode or 2 episodes devoted to mulliganing, and there's like practical good advice that you can bring to the table. And of course they are most famous for their set review shows. They have they reviewed Gatecrash recently, and they spent 5.5 hours doing commons and uncommons, and then another 3 hours doing rares and mythics. And I listened to both those shows 3 times each. So this is by far the difference is enormous between this and any other podcast. This is by far the best podcast about Magic, and even if you don't draft, I'd say that the tactics and strategy and mulliganing parts are so good that you should listen to this podcast anyway, especially if you're a Pauper player. Alright, that's the top list for February 2013. So we probably missed some podcasts because I am just one person and I don't listen to every podcast, even though I'm quite close. I find the podcast on mtgcast.com, so there might be another source for Magic podcasts, and in that case let me know. Please let me know what you want me to listen to. I will listen to at least one episode of any podcast you post in the comments on YouTube, not on mtgostrat.com, but on YouTube. Okay, I will probably listen to it if you post it on mtgostrat.com as well. So thank you for listening, and I hope I've provided you with some information that can help you find a podcast that you like. And here's how to contact us. Thanks.